Thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad you're coming first because we were talking about this earlier. You've been a lifelong environmentalist. You started pushing this at Ford 3 decades ago. But when you started pushing it, there was an enormous amount of mistrust, both inside the company and outside the company. People inside the company said, whoa, wait a minute, let's talk about the business. People outside of the company said, oh, you must be carrying it must be some sort of hidden agenda, wolf in sheep's clothing. So how have you seen these issues evolve over that time?
Well, they've really become core business issues, thankfully, because I think as long as an environmental issue, or frankly any other issue, human rights, anything else, is off to the side and is dealt with as a separate issue, then you really never make progress. And the way you really progress it is that if it gets into the business plan, something you're measured against every year, and something that the entire organization knows is important. So I think, having it become mainstream, not just for my company, but I suspect for most of the companies here, and something that you measure every year, that's important. I would say one other thing, too. Back in the 30 years, actually almost 40 years ago, when I really began all of this within Ford and within the industry, being an environmentalist was essentially a very depressing proposition because there were no solutions. All you could do was be against things, do less. Technology hadn't gotten to the point where it is today, where all of a sudden solutions were possible, and you could pursue those solutions and build your business at the same time.
So why has it become mainstream at companies like Ford? We thought, as we were talking about 10 years ago, we thought policy would make it mainstream. That didn't happen. So what has made it central to Ford's
Well, first of all,
business?
I think society in general has raised the issue to the point where, as children from the first day of kindergarten are getting taught that this is an important issue, and they learn everything from turning off the water when they're brushing their teeth and things like that. And so we have now a generation of those people grown up and into the workplace. And so one of the things that was very true at Ford was it was very much a bottom-up movement.
From the employees?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was speaking about it, the upper management thought I was insane, but the lower ranks of the company, the new hires, thought it was great.
And those new hires have become a bigger and bigger factor.
Well, absolutely. Well, today they're running the company.
So the employee pressure is more important than the customer pressure.
Well,
or
customer
the
pressure is
investor
really
pressure.
important, and I think that you raise an interesting point, because it used to be if you were an environmentalist in the car business, or if you were a customer, I should say, you had to make tremendous trade-offs. So if you asked anybody, "Are you an environmentalist?" they'd all say yes. But then you'd say, are you willing to give up horsepower? Are you willing to give up things like air conditioning? And all of a sudden, the number starts to dwindle. It was only really recently that you could provide a vehicle that had really no trade-offs. And then everybody very much embraced it.
So customers still aren't willing to make trade-offs?
Well, they are. But I think it's to a point. And some of it's an affordability issue, and because new technologies can sometimes be expensive. And so customers really will make trade-offs, but there is a limit.
So your title at Ford these days is executive chairman. Mm-hmm. I don't know if maybe there's some other executive chairman. What does that mean? I know what a non-executive chairman is.
Well, I think I may have created this title some years ago because what it really means is I'm looking at the long-term viability of our business. And it's something I think I've always done, and it's now something that I'm doing on a full-time basis. So, this whole notion of mobility and where we take it, working with cities around the world, working with governments around the world to enact a better outcome for society, those are things that I'm working on and also, as I say, trying to really position our company for the long term. And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask, does the long term conflict with the short term?
No.
We were talking, well, let me throw out a specific, because where's Kay Seal? I know she's out there somewhere. Yes, there. Kay was saying earlier that she's the president of Zipcar. If you take, the Zipcar users can take 13 cars off the road. For the short-term health of Ford Motor Company, that's not a good thing to take those 13 cars off the road.
Alan, let me tell you a funny story that I don't think you know. The last time I was here you interviewed me, it was Fortune Brainstorm Green. And the speaker before me was a fellow named Scott Griffith, who was CEO of Zipcar. And I sat through his presentation, and he said, if I'm successful, I'm going to take X million cars off the road. So as soon as he finished, and as soon as I finished, I grabbed him and I said, let's go get coffee. And he said, didn't you hear what I said? I'm going to take cars off the road. And I said, yes, but it's going to happen with or without us, and I'd like to find a way to have it work with us. So, and Kay and I were just talking, what we did was we went to our weakest demographic, which was new-time buyers, first-time buyers. And Zipcar had early data that showed that when people left Zipcar, they were heavily influenced when they bought a vehicle by what they drove at Zipcar. So what we did together, we went to college campuses all around the country with focuses and with escapes. And we built a business around college campuses together, which is going great guns. And it's working. It's introducing the first-time buyer to Ford products in a way that they wouldn't have before. So I guess my point is, you mentioned Zipcar. To me, that was a great win for us because short term, yeah, you could say, well, they're the enemy. Not really, because as I say, their success was going to happen with or without us, and I wanted to find a way to happen with us.
And when you have a CEO who is focused on having to speak to the street and explain results quarter to quarter, can you have that conversation?
Sure you can, but I mean, what we've found in our company is that it really works to have both of us, and importantly, it gives both Mark Fields and I someone to bounce ideas off of, which you don't often have.
Would you recommend that structure to others?
Every company is different. Yeah, it's worked really well. I will tell you though, that personalities are just as important as structure. You can put any structure you want in, and if there isn't goodwill, and there isn't communication, and there isn't trust, then it's not going to work. But on the other hand, in our case, it's been great.
I mean, the other thing that makes Ford distinctive is the family control of 40% of the voting share.
Right.
Maybe 4% of the value, but 40% of the
Well, it does allow
shares.
us, I think, to look longer term, because I feel like I'm working for my children and my grandchildren, and trying to build the business that is truly long-term sustainable.
But some shareholders feel shortchanged by that.
I don't think so. I mean, look, we just had a record year profit-wise. We had a all-time record first quarter. Our market share is growing around the world, and we're pursuing these long-term aims. I don't think so.
Yeah. So let's talk about this mobility shift that
Sure.
you've been focused on. If you read the news, you see all sorts of interesting things happening. GM investing in Lyft. Apple investing in
Didi.
Didi, Lyft's competitor in China. A lot of talk about Google, maybe working with you, maybe working with somebody else, maybe building their own car. It's very confusing and hard to figure out, but where do you think this is going, and how does Ford play in it?
Well, that's a really good question. In 2011, I gave a TED Talk about the notion that we were becoming ever more crowded as a world, and that the idea of shoving more cars into a world where we already had gridlock just didn't make sense, and that new solutions were going to have to come about. And at the time I gave that speech, I got the kind of same reception that I got when I used to talk about the environment. But now everybody's all over that, and I think it's great. So what's it going to look like? Not clear yet. We have experiments going all over the world in all kinds of different solutions. Because at the end of the day, you've got to monetize it and make a business out of it. So you're going to see partnerships for sure between tech companies and autos. You're going to also see startups coming into the equation and working with companies like ours. And that's going to be incumbent on us because that's a muscle we haven't used in many, many years. And we have to be accessible to young companies and know how to work with them. But it's the most exciting time in my lifetime. Because if we get this right, we can emerge from all of this as a higher margin, less capital intensive, less cyclical business. If we get it wrong, we become like the handset, where all the value is somewhere else. And so, I think this is really, really interesting.
Okay, so talk about who has the upper hand in this negotiation. Is it easier for an auto company like yours to become proficient in tech than it is for a tech company to become proficient in autos?
You know, it's sort of a false question, and the reason I say that is, you know, we have been building our tech capability for years and years through safety, you know, communication, vehicle-to-vehicle communications, all those kinds of things. And some of the tech companies also know how to make things. So it's not a, you know, total black and white issue. But what I think the tech companies are finding and what we're finding is that we do different things very well, and we actually do need each other. Integrating technology into a vehicle is more difficult than I think a lot of the tech companies thought it would be. And making things every day on time with quality is something that some tech companies don't have a lot of experience with. So, I really do think we're in a world of partnerships, and that will take us forward.
And what are going to be the key partnerships for Ford?
It really depends on the issue, because this whole notion of mobility is so big and so broad. I mean, you know, I started my own venture capital firm in 2008 to invest in mobility solutions because I saw this day coming. And mobility now, if I just look at what the VC, we've got marine applications, we have, you know, aircraft applications, but, you know, drones, but also, you know, parking, you know, all the different verticals that go into a vehicle all now have mobility solutions behind them. So the answer is different depending on what you're talking about. One thing I'd like to mention, though, almost everybody is focused on the TED Talk I gave in 2011 about gridlock. That's where you know, the world is focusing now, autonomy, gridlock, and alleviating urban congestion. Huge issue, and we need to fix it. But there's a whole nother piece of mobility that's not getting much attention that I feel really needs it, and we are spending time on, and that is bringing mobility to people that don't have access to health care, don't have access to food distribution. I mean, there are 800 million people, at least in this world, that don't have access to health care. So one of the things we're doing is we have an experiment now in India where we're using our vehicles that are to map routes into the countryside because they're equipped with sensors. Once there, they monitor the health of expectant mothers. And the data is transmitted back through our vehicles to hospitals in the main city. And then advice is also then transmitted back to the women to have a better outcome with their pregnancy. So we also have in Gambia, Riders for Health, which is an NGO there. We're equipping their vehicles with sensors so that they can figure out the best routes and the most optimized way to deliver health care to the villages that they deal with. Those are forms of mobility also, both of those, which aren't getting a lot of airtime that I think are critically important. Because if you think about what mobility is, it's freeing up, it's making people's lives better, is what it, and so in urban areas, that means giving them time back. In areas like I just described, it could mean something very, very different.
That's a vision that really further breaks down the barriers between industries.
Well, it has to. I mean, look, we are working now with municipalities, with tech companies, with software providers. I mean, it's all these issues. These are big issues that our globe is facing, whether it's global warming, whether it's feeding a burgeoning population, whether it's moving goods and healthcare and people around an ever more crowded world. These aren't issues that most single companies are going to be able to solve themselves.
Yeah. Government policy, how important is that? We're talking about the private sector taking the lead, but can the private sector really lead on some of these issues?
I think so. And what I've found is that cities and states and cities around the world, not just in the US, are often the best places to try things to take the lead. There's often less red tape. There's often a bigger identified need, a more immediate identified need by the politicians, and more receptivity. So we've launched a bunch of these projects around the world. A lot of it is with cities and with local governments rather than big governments.
You're not that excited about what you can do in Washington?
I mean, it's a tough environment. There's no question. It's hard to get much of anything done.
For Ford's business, which of the two remaining candidates is the best candidate? Donald Trump or Sorry, had to ask. Or Hillary Clinton?
I don't think we know enough. I don't think we've heard enough policy yet to really be able to declare that.
I'm going to open it up to questions in just a minute, but before I do that, I know you have some pretty interesting news that you were going to share with us on carbon capture that I...
Yeah, this is kind of neat. Talking about environmental things, and so it's everything from electrification to how you make your vehicles. And one of the things that we've just come up with is a way to capture the CO2 from our industrial process, turn it into a polymer, which then goes into a foam, which will make our seats and our interiors. So,
Will that be all your seats?
I don't know yet, but eventually it'd be great if it was all our seats. It's a way to capture carbon, save about 600 million barrels of oil a year just by doing that. So, it's really been interesting to try and come up with new ways to solve environmental solutions. And as I say, what's really cool is all this technology now is enabling solutions that even 2-3 years ago wasn't possible.
Let's open it up to questions. We have mic runners out there, so if you get your hand up, please. Right over here. And then I think there's one in the back.
Bill, imagine if you're in...
identify yourself before you ask your
Ron
question,
Kamen
please.
with E2 and Earthkind Energy in New York.
Yeah.
Imagine you're in 2021, 5 years from now. What does Ford look like?
It's really hard to put a time frame on anything because we're always wrong usually, particularly with the rate of change in technology. But I'll take a stab at it. We'll be further down the road in these mobility solutions. Autonomous vehicles will be not an anathema to most people. In that time frame, we'll still have internal combustion engines, but we'll be heavily down the electrification road as well. The way people access vehicles will be different. You all know Uber and Lyft and Zipcars certainly. We're experimenting with ways to have fractional ownership through our credit arm. So I think that our business will look different certainly than today, and it's hard. But as I say, it's really hard to put too fine a point on the time frame. Some of these things will happen quicker than I think they will. Others may take longer.
When does the internal combustion engine end?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of that, the price of oil, the customer right now there isn't a great pull for electrification, and we just announced we're spending $4.5 billion to bring out 13 new electrified models. So we want it to go, and we want it to go fast. So there are a lot of exogenous factors that we can't control that would answer that question definitively. So I don't think I'm going to guess, frankly, but we're headed down that road, Alan.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Looks like most of the answers came out before I asked the question, but this is
okay.
Mike
Ask another
Police from Car Charging. We're an electric vehicle charging
great.
infrastructure company and helping you with your adoption as well.
Yeah.
And the question was, what are you spending on electrification, and do you envision that eventually your fleet each one will have a plug, and what your thoughts are? So you answered it quite gracefully, but you want to add an additional comment?
Sure. So. I think, and you know this better than anybody, I should have you answer this question, but pure battery vehicles, they're getting much, much better, range is getting better, and the cost is coming down. And it needs to continue to, because if it's somebody's primary vehicle, not their second or third or fourth vehicle, then they have to be able to count on it. And so I think as a transitional technology, plug-in hybrids makes a lot of sense, because if you could, I know you know all this, but if you drive in a daily commute, let's say in San Francisco, all week you could just be on your electric battery and never tap into your internal combustion engine. But if you wanted to go to Los Angeles for the weekend, you could do that too without having any range anxiety. So I think that's a very interesting transitional technology, particularly for people where it's their only vehicle. Oh, well, thank you.
That's a good advertisement. Back there.
Brian DeMaine from Fortune. Hi, Bill.
Oh, hi, Brian.
So could you handicap the self-driving car environment for us? Will we have totally autonomous vehicles? When? And who will build them? Will Apple buy Tesla? Will Ford build cars for Google? Will Uber control everything?
Well, Brian, you could probably answer this better than I could. I have no idea what our competitors are going to acquire or not. But we have the largest test fleet of autonomous vehicles on the road today. We're heavily into it.
What does that mean? How many cars are we talking about?
30.
30 fully autonomous vehicles on the road.
And and they're getting better all the time.
And that's working with Google on those? Or?
No, we're working with different suppliers, and a lot of it is our own in-house capability. But as you know, autonomous driving, you can't be 80% right. You can't be 90% right. And so, it's not like a software issue where you can fix it on the fly and, without complicating this too much. I think the hardware will get there before we figured out some of the societal issues. And the reason I say that is there's this whole ethical debate around autonomy. So everybody is familiar with the conversation, what does the car hit, the grandmother or the child? But it actually goes much further than that. What if the right outcome if for society is for the car to take care of you, the driver, or the passenger? Because imagine this. I was just at MIT, and an ethicist there was laying out a scenario saying, well, what if you're a passenger, the only passenger in an autonomous vehicle, and that autonomous vehicle sees a runaway truck that's going to hit 10 pedestrians? The best outcome for society is for the vehicle to intercept the truck, kill you, and, you and I don't have to make those decisions as drivers. We don't have time. But autonomous vehicles are going to have to, and they're going to have to be programmed in a way that the ethics are going to, and certainly no individual company is going to be able to do that. This has to be a societal discussion and outcome. So those kinds of things may slow down.
Harder than the technology.
It's harder than the technology, exactly. Because cars will be able to make decisions that you and I won't be able to make.
A question right back here.
Hi, I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about the carbon capture. What's the process that you're using? And that 600 million barrels, what % of your production is that? And is there any projections for it to grow in the future?
Can you just identify yourself for everyone first?
I'm actually Fourth Estate. Ann Mulcair, and I work for Environment and Energy Publishing.
We have no bias against the Fourth Estate at Fortune. Yeah.
So the process is actually one that is a little out of my wheelhouse. Basically, you capture the carbon through a process, it's turned into a polymer, and then that polymer then is used to make the foam. Beyond that, you got to get someone with much better knowledge than I have of this. But and the 600 billion is what our engineers have estimated. It's only an estimate once we get up and running, and frankly, it's going to take us 4 to 5 years to get it out there at any kind of number.
So we're unfortunately out of time.
That was quick.
It was quick, and there's a lot more we could have covered. I hope we can have further conversations in the hallway.